Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to another video of EnglishEverest.com, IELTS Writing Task Lesson Series. In today's lesson, we're going to look at grouping data, but mainly focusing on writing dynamic sentences. Dynamic sentences talks about movement, time, 1985 to 1995, movement through time. Here we have 1994 to 1998, 5 years, movement through time, up and down. So that's what we mean by dynamic sentences. So grouping data is part of the planning stage of the essay. You need to decide how you're going to organize the data into groups so you can write more effectively. One of the task achievement criteria is for the essays to be easy to read and follow. This is dependent on how you organize the information. For dynamic data, the rule of thumb is look at the groups. How many groups are there? How varied is the data? Is the data all of the same type? Meaning, for dynamic data, how many lines are there? If there are 3 lines, that constitutes 3 groups. Here, for example, there are 1, 2, 3, 10 years, 85, 95. So there's 10 years or 11. So that would constitute 11 groups, but you would group them together. How varied is the data? Does it have massive peaks and really low troughs? So does it go from really high to really low? That's what we mean about variation. Is the data all of the same type? Is it all year, or does it include 2 different measurements? So always check these things, because if it includes 2 different types of measurements, you may have to write about each one separately to make sure that it's not confusing. Okay, for dynamic data, which is time-based, we look at how much movement there is and follow the greatest movement, least movement, trends, similarities and differences. That's the order we usually look at the data. Okay, we're going to use the bar chart we used before. Again, dynamic data, because it goes through time. Even though they're bars, it's still got time. As long as it's got time, it's dynamic. So grouping data does not mean you must follow only one way. There are several ways that you can do this. For this chart, we have male part-time, male full-time, female full-time, female part-time, increases, decreases, part-time, full-time. So there's lots of different ways that you could organize your essay, organize the groups. So here there are 7 possible groups that could be used. It's better to use the grouping, which will make it easier for you to organize and write your essay. Don't make it too complicated. 3 to 4 groups is enough, more than enough, as these will be the main data groups. So for this video, we're going to do males, females, part-time, full-time. Now remember, the grouping is going to be part of the paragraphs, but the main focus of this is to make sure that you're comfortable looking at and producing dynamic language. Okay, because part-time education was the highest, it's more logical to start with this. Remember, largest first. We'll compare male and females and numbers, and trends for both. We will then look at full-time and do the same. We will also include some comparisons. Always make comparisons as it is in the instructions. Make comparisons where possible or where relevant. So we're going to use dynamic language, which talks about rise and fall, up and down. We generally use the adjective, noun, verb, adverb forms. You'll see examples of comparative language, which should also be used, but not as much as dynamic language. So examples of dynamic sentence are a steady fall. Adjective, steady, describing a fall, which is a noun. Increased dramatically. Increased is a verb. Dramatically is an adverb. These are the main two. There are a couple of different ones. For example, remained steady. Now, steady is an adjective, so you've got verb adjective. So, but these are the main two. We also need to introduce each paragraph with a discourse marker. As the name suggests, it's a marker to tell the examiner what follows. Always use them throughout your essays. So, beginning with the first body paragraph, and again, I've kind of condensed this because we're not going to write the full thing. We're focusing on these things. So here's our discourse marker. With regard to, regarding, to begin with, part-time education. This introduction tells the examiner what is going to follow. Information about part-time education. 5 to 7 words. So short introduction. Then we have a starting point. This will go before the statistical information begins. So we're introducing our paragraph to say what it's about, and then we begin introducing the data. Male student numbers commenced, began, or started at. So there's our starting point. Even though it's not moving at the moment, we must have a beginning point. So we include this in dynamic data because everything must have a start and a finish. So we've got 3 different verbs. Here we just use past tense. If your chart is in the past, you just use a single past tense verb because it's not moving. So the numbers, let's just choose, began at 1 million in 1970 and steadily decreased. Now, here you can actually use adverb verb because adverb verb. I've given you an example there. It's okay to write adverb verb, but the general rule is you should stick to, if you're not sure, stick to verb adverb. So here we would say and decreased steadily to about 850,000 in 1980 to 81. This was followed. So again, this is a marker to tell us that the next thing that's going to happen. This was followed by a slight increase. Adjective, noun. To end, and again, because we have a beginning, we must have an end. End in 1991 in the region of, and then we tell us what the numbers are for the ending. Okay. The patterns for females, so we introduce the next section, show an opposite trends. This sentence tells the examiner what will follow. It's telling us that it's females, and it's also telling us that the information is opposite to what we've just read. They commenced, began, started. So remember, interact, change this. If you use commence, don't use it again here. Use began. Always change your verb. At just above 700,000 in 1970 to 71. This increased gradually or rose steadily or rose dramatically, whatever the information tells you, until 1980 to 81 to about 820,000. A sharp jump, so adjective noun, followed, and the final number, this tells us it's the end, final, was in the region of 1.1 million. So there's our data. So Oops, sorry. We now continue and begin to talk about full-time data. This is the second body paragraph with reference to full-time students. This tells the examiner what is to follow. Student figures in this sector follow a similar trend. So there's a comparison, similar to the one before for both groups. Females started slightly lower, so beginning point was lower than the other one. Remember, when you begin, you can't say slightly lower because you've got nothing to compare it with. But when you write your second body paragraph, you can compare it. You can compare it to the first paragraph. So you can begin by saying it was slightly lower, but you can't introduce the first body paragraph with this language. You have to say began. Okay, started slightly lower than males at less than 100,000, but increased more between 1970 and 1980. Instead of saying increased steadily, we're saying it's increased more than the men did. So again, more comparison. Both groups finished with the same numbers of just over 200,000. So we've got our finish point. We should have our start point there. I forgot to color code it, but it should be start. Sorry, it should be start and finish. Okay, so there are different ways to write your information. There's no one special way. Everyone sees data different in different ways. But if you want a fixed way, then please follow the examples. So here are some examples for each thing. Begin with starting points. So here are some examples to begin with. At the start of something, for example, males began at, females commenced at, both groups started at. And then you finish with endpoints. Males finished at, females ended at. To finish, finally finish at, and then you put the information, the data, to end the period at 150,000. So there are some variations you can use for your practice and some more examples to follow. Examples of beginning and expressions to use in your essay. Male student numbers began, started, commenced. The period began, started, commenced. So you can either use it for, here we're talking about the participants, the groups. Here we're talking about the time. So you can use either one. And then we have female full-time members, ended, finished. And then we've also got, as we said before, at the end of the period. So that means at the end of everything. Okay, so practice the sentences, write sentences until you feel comfortable doing them. Before you think about doing the exam, you've got to be comfortable writing these sentences and looking at information and being able to write sentences easily. Because again, you're against the clock. So 20 minutes is not long. So you have to make sure that when you see information, dynamic information, you can write the sentence, you can look at it and say, oh, I can see what that's doing, and you can produce sentences that show that information accurately, but you can do it quickly. That's what, going into the exam, you should be in that position where you can do this. Make sure your information is accurate to get a better chance of getting a good score. Remember, you can write great sentences and follow all the grammar rules, but if that information is not correct, that severely affects your score because the information must be correct. The sentence you write must follow the information on the graph or the chart. Okay, that's the end of the lesson. Please subscribe to our channel, like it, comment on it, click the notification button so you are notified when new material is published. There are websites for both English and Chinese students. And if you want to book classes directly with us, you can book at our booking URL. This takes you directly to our booking platform where you can just register. It's an automatic registration, and purchase your classes and book your lessons. Okay, thank you for your time, and see you in the next video.